I am a vegetarian, a physician of mixed ethnic heritage, and grew up in a middle class, mostly white neighborhood in Northern California. Central Louisiana, where I live now, has a mixed culture of black and white and a rich diet, including lots of meats and spices. How did I connect with my patients with different cultural backgrounds? My guest today, Charde Hollins, is the owner of Relevant Connections. She is a social worker who in her early years worked with juveniles in a prison system. Charde comes from a conservative religious background. How did she connect with her juvenile delinquents? Stay tuned to find out.
Baransu Balance podcast with Dr. Ince emphasizes the interdependence and importance of a healthy mind, body, and soul.
Welcome, Charde Hollins. I am so excited. Welcome to another episode of Baransu Balance podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Okay. Well, I understand that you are the owner of Relevant Connections and that you have a social worker background. Your main job, I believe the one that brings in the bucks, is writing grants.
Yeah.
And that is just so amazing. $6.5 million, I believe you've brought in for your customers.
Yes.
Yeah. But today I want to concentrate on your two other areas of your company, and that is your training of social workers to be culturally relevant,
Yeah.
and the third section that says that you use a biblical approach to mental health. So I thought that was fascinating. But Charde, before we start, can you just tell me a little bit about what is a social worker and what are some of the requirements?
Wonderful question. So, a social worker is a profession similar to being a physician, a lawyer, and the fact that you go to school, you receive a 4-year degree. And then, after you receive that 4-year degree, there are different licenses that you can take in order to really seal the deal on your professional skill set. And so, I encourage everyone who enjoys working with people and recognizing that in order for change to take place, it's not just the person, but it's a holistic approach. So this is a very deep question. It's something that is very dear to my heart because I love social work so much, but I'm going to try to put it in the most plainest form in a nutshell. Okay. So one of the biggest difference between social work and psychology is about the mind. When you talk to someone who's in psychology, the concept is that everything you need to succeed, you have. All I need to study is you, your brain, your thought process, all of those things, even your body, things of that nature. You have the answers. You are who you are because of you. So I'm working with you and you only to fix it. Social work came around because we recognize that it's a holistic approach because we actually have environmental things and family structures that actually play a factor in who we are. And so what social work is literally social, your social being and around you that says, not only am I going to look at you as a person, but I'm going to look at your family structure. I'm going to look at your environment. I'm going to look at your economics, everything that is you. And so you'll see a lot of social workers who are in the community, who are at schools, who are in homes, because we believe as social workers that you must understand the entire person in order to truly support them in being their best self.
Wow, Charde, I really love that. I am a physician and I understand that a lot of our health is related to the social determinants of health, where we live, where we worship, and so many other factors. So that brings me to the next question, and that is, can you walk me through your training process when you train social workers to be culturally aware. So you're a you're a teacher, and you have the big picture. And I understand you have a master's, so just
Yeah,
lots of information under your belt that if you could share with us.
absolutely. So this is really dear to my heart. One of the reasons why I started Relevant Connections is literally the name, right? So I worked in a background. My background is in social work. I have my master's degree and the highest licensure with supervision as well. And so what that means is when I was in the community, um, I was in school-based social work, and then I went to prison. And the
Oh,
prison was with juveniles. So these are young men between the ages of 12 to 20 who are not sitting there awaiting trial. They have been adjudicated. They are there for 4 years, 5 years, 1 year, 2 year. They are there. And they put me on a unit that's called the gang unit. So what happened was in the prison system, at least in mine, they had what's called pick a post. And pick a post means anytime a new clinician came, you got to go into the warden's office and you got to pick which unit you wanted to be on, starting from the veteran. So this was a great opportunity for anybody who did not like where they were to be able to move. And so you go down the list, and of course, as the rookie, I was last to go. So I didn't get to pick a post. A post picked me. And the and the posts that picked me were these young men, and I was supposed to do treatment with them at least 4 times a week. I walked into the room and I realized that this big old book that I had of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and DBT, and all this T's that I had learned in this book, these young men looking at me, it was not about to happen.
uh-oh.
I realized like I had to choose right then and there, how can I make a relevant connection?
Uh,
What is it that I can utilize that even though this information in the book is necessary, how is it that I can get the information across in a way that's relevant? So that way they can actually understand and care about what I'm saying.
oh, Charde, that is probably the most important thing in medicine is how to make things relevant. Woof.
So that's really, I tell my kids all the time and people all the time, I learned how to be culturally competent in that prison system. And it really was because 90% of the young men that was in front of me were Black. They had Black cisgender heterosexual mothers, which means technically I'm Black, I'm cisgender, I'm heterosexual. So, oh, we share the same culture. But do we? No, because there's really 10 elements of culture and none of them have to do with race, sex, gender, or our sexuality. You know, it really has to do with the way we communicate, our language, the way we dress, the way that we have family structures and relationships. Like culture is lived experiences. How is it that we have moved about life that causes things to help us with different perspectives? And my perspective and lived experience is very much different than their perspective
Wait,
and
wait,
lived experience.
wait, slight problem.
Yes, I think I got
We're back.
excited
We're
and
back.
they did fireworks because
Oh, okay.
the computer just loved what I was saying. They put fireworks behind me.
Okay.
But that's really the point of when I'm talking to clinicians, whether you're social work, whether you're an educator, really anyone who is doing work with people. How is it that you can build connections with individuals and be culturally competent? And it's not about race, sex, gender, ethnicity, but it's really about speaking their language, not just Spanish, French, Creole, but speaking literally the words, what is something, making sure I'm explaining something in a way that they understand, right?
So you
Yeah.
said that you didn't find this necessarily in a textbook, but did you have some classes that kind of pointed you in that direction of how to deal with someone from a different background of yourself?
Oh, this is a good question. And I'm going to bluntly say no. And
Oh,
I'm going to tell
no,
you
you're
why.
kidding.
No, most of the time when we talk about culture, we're usually talking about race or gender or even age. When we talk about culture, most times you're talking about, oh, someone who lives in a setting that may be a different socioeconomic background, right? Or even when we talk about, or someone who may speak a different language. We rarely really talk about culture as you identify in all these checks as me, but yet we have different lived experiences. That didn't exist when I was coming up. And so I don't think it was necessarily because someone was incompetent. I think it's more so because the world has grown and we just become more aware. And so now there's some form that's come out, but it really isn't as prevalent as it needs to be, which is where I thrive, and why a lot of times, different hospitals, universities, and agencies are calling Relevant Connections to say, hey, we've never heard the breakdown that you have of culture and how to really support the way that you've talked about it. And so it's something I'm excited about and that people are interested in.
Okay. So back to your prison, what are they called? Clients
Yeah,
or
client.
they're not patients, but okay,
Yeah, client.
so your clients, and there is probably very little in your background that you connected with them. So how did you, well, other than race, which I think is relevant for,
Yes, yes.
it may have reminded you of a cousin or an uncle or
Yeah.
or some wayward person in your distant past. But so or how did you connect with them, or how did they begin to trust what you had to say?
Yeah. So it definitely was a self journey. The first thing I had to realize is that they are my clients and their needs are superior to mine. So the whole reason of why I am there is because my role is to support them in um, being able to change the way that they think, or understanding attitude, behavior, and consequences, or whatever the case is. So I had to start thinking like my client.
Hmm.
So what is it when I look at this book that's saying, hey, we have attitudes, behaviors, and consequences? We want the boys to be able to identify what is the attitude that you have, how that attitude leads to a certain behavior, and then how that behavior has a consequence.
So
That's like a
you're referring to the concept of cognitive behavior therapy,
correct.
trying to
Correct.
change their attitudes and their emotions and their actions.
Exactly. And so, of course, in this, that is the concept in the textbook that oftentimes we have, or in the way that we do it, the stories that are in there. Tom stepped on Bob's foot and now he's angry. What should Bob do? That's not really a relevant scenario to
Okay.
these gentlemen.
Okay. So you're talking about concrete.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
even as
Mhm.
far as what does it look like to explain certain things to them, bringing in songs, bringing in videos that actually
Mhm.
speak to their culture, because culture is language. What kind of stories can be spoken in a way in which they understand? They understand music. What kind of music can be utilized where this is the format of today's session? And it's a certain song. And now we're going to talk about attitude, behavior, and consequences of this rapper, because he just talked about his entire life in this song.
Mm. Mm.
And now you can check those boxes off, which is totally different if we were just talking about Bobby and Sally who stepped on people's foot. It's
Okay.
so much more culturally competent.
All right. So what if you're a social worker in a hospital in a busy ER where 9 out of 10 people you're asked to see are drug addicts and in your and at some point you become jaded and believe that everyone who's a drug addict is a drain on society.
Mm.
How do you instruct
Yeah.
that social worker?
Well, first, we always want to do our own self checks to see, if what we're working in is still the space that we need to be in, So if we start recognizing there's a difference between burnout and being tired, and there's a difference between burnout and being jaded, right? And so recognizing like, am
Or burnout and being prejudiced.
exactly, exactly. And
Or
so
maybe you always had that bias against drug addicts.
yeah. And it's like figuring those things out and having our own, you know, meter of testing. And we talk about that too. This is a very robust topic because part of being culturally competent is also being aware of self. So before we can even break down how to be culturally competent to our clients, we first have to be able to do some inner work. And I tell clinicians all the time, teachers, physicians, all of those things. It's just, sorry, all of those people is our our um our role that we have within health and even with education are the most nosy jobs out there.
Yes, yes.
We require people to tell us all their business. We know
Right.
their business before they know it sometimes because as a physician, you see certain things. I mean, they bear their souls or their bodies to us.
Right.
However, for some reason, when it's time for us to do the same and to recognize our flaws or to speak to certain things, sometimes our profession, we don't want to do that. We don't want to really think about the fact that we could be biased or we could not be culturally aware or the way in which our perspectives do actually impact how we treat or do things with our clients. So in order to be culturally competent, the first thing you have to do is admit that there is a need for growth. And that's literally what we tell our clients and patients all the time.
Mhm.
We have to do the same thing when it comes to being culturally aware and
That's one
and
of
that.
the best compliments I can give an employee. One is to be conscientious, but the other is to be teachable. I mean, if you know everything, then there's not much hope.
Yeah. And then I also share with people too, if you do find yourself in a space where you're kind of just like, thinking about what brought you into this work. Many times when you're part of the healthcare profession, you have a very personal story. Whether it's you went through or someone that you knew went through something medical or a disease and you saw them fight through that, or whether if you're a clinician and you're doing therapy or treatment, you yourself may be a survivor of depression, suicide ideation, or you were with someone who had a mental illness, or you grew up in a certain neighborhood. So oftentimes we're tied somehow personally to the work that we do within healthcare. And so I always recognizing that and thinking back on your why. Because of that, each of us, if we think back on our why, it allows us to realize that we could easily be who's sitting in front of us.
Okay.
Because if I
So,
think, yes.
so my last note on this subject is that social work to me takes care of disadvantaged people. And what what ties disadvantaged people together is probably more than their differences. I mean, the poverty, like you said, almost doesn't matter what race you are. Poverty, if you can't afford food to eat, it's going to affect you adversely, will increase the crime rate and violence. But there are some differences, between the cultures.
Absolutely.
How tightly knit maybe immigrant families are, or the difference between first generation, second generation Asian immigrants, or from the West Indies. Do you have specific tips for your social workers in regards to these specific subcategories, or you just point them to a book?
No, so we usually when I'm speaking, it's really general information, breadth versus depth. So talking about whatever we're So the best way I can answer that question is if when we learn how to read, right? So if someone is teaching you how to read, they teach you how to sound out a word. So that way you're not memorizing what every word is, but you are learning how to create words yourself. And so that is what my role is sharing the letters and the sounds of the letters for cultural competence. So that way, when you get into a specific situation, whether it's a subset of a certain population, you have the tools and the concepts to say, okay, this is how I pronounce this. Now let me utilize it for this specific subset. Hopefully that makes sense. And
Okay.
so it's
So
not,
you give them the
okay, here's,
tools, the big,
yeah, it's
okay.
about the tools, because then we
Mhm.
would be, if we only were taught how to read by knowing every word, we would never reach the goal.
There is a concept in this field called cultural humility. It almost sounds like a biblical term, but it means that you are humble enough to realize that you will be forever learning about other cultures. It is not a list of facts that you memorize about another culture. It is an attitude of lifelong, ongoing self reflection and willingness to learn from others while respecting differences. Mhm.
And people will forever be relying on their teacher to, because I never knew
Mhm.
this word, but I can see a word today that I've never seen ever. But because I was taught how to pronounce, I could figure it out. And so
Okay.
that's what the training is about. The training is about, this is the concepts and the tools that you need so that when you are in these experiences, regardless of whether it's Asian, Black, Hispanic, um, whatever the case may be, I have these tools to figure it out so that way I can make sure I can support them the best way possible.
Okay. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So our my podcast, the Baransu Balance podcast, is balance of the mind, body, and soul. So we're going to pivot to the soul.
Okay.
You tell me on your website that caught my eye. You talked about the biblical approach to mental health.
Yes, so my I also have a faith background, and so part of the reason why I enjoy this work is because it ties in like all the things I'm passionate about, and it ties together people, it ties together faith, and so bringing those things together is extremely important to me. And so one of the things when we that I say all the time is Jesus is real and therapy is biblical. And so oftentimes people feel as though, I only go to therapy if I have a problem, and that's not the case at all. Jesus puts counsel continuously in the Bible. He shows us people who utilized counsel. He shows us people who needed resources. Jesus is the master social worker. And when we think about the life that he lived, he literally fed and clothed and healed people before he even told them who he was. And so when you think about what social work is, that is what we do. We have a holistic approach where we want to feed, we want to house, we want to heal and support you. So that way you can be your best self. And he did it by doing relevant connections. He made sure that he provided you with what you needed before he told you something else about, religion or spirituality. He showed you who he was before he told you who he was. And I believe the same thing goes when we're in this profession of social work.
Oh, thank you so much. Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. So, any last words? How do you balance it all and avoid burnout, Charde?
Good question. Every day, I tell people all the time, I am my longest running client. I treat myself every day. We will never discharge. And it's really a journey that I've been on, understanding that who I am and what God has called me to be. He's providing the avenues for me to do that. And so one of the things that I actually talk about as well too is I have something called the HEAL framework, because I realized that individuals who are in the helping profession, burnout is high, and oftentimes It's like, oh, well, take a day off, go get a massage, do this, do that. And I'm like, that don't work. I still am burnt out. But what I realized is,
It'll work for 30 minutes.
right, right. As soon as the massage is over, as soon as the pedicure is done, as soon as you wake up from your nap, and all of those things are still important. But when we talk about the core of not burning out, the core of not being jaded, or whatever the case may be, it's really because we have to heal. And so I created a heal framework, which I have to go through every day, of recognizing that I have to honor my past experiences. I embrace the fact that I am human. So many times we advocate for everyone else. However, as soon as we do one little mistake, we ourselves are so heavy on us. I mean, I advocated for people who are in prison. We advocate for people who have addictions, and we want them to have all these second chances, but let me burn a pot of rice. Let me forget to 5 minutes to pick up my daughter. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm horrible. But no, I'm embracing the fact that I am human, being attuned to other people's needs, and then just being able to be liberated in the freedom of knowing that in this walk towards humanity, I have the right to make mistakes, but I also have the responsibility to do better. And when you have those two combinations, you give yourself more grace. Learning how to give myself the grace that I give my clients, that I give people. And once I do that, all of a sudden it's like, okay, it's all right. So that's the advice I would give people, is extend yourself the same grace you extend those that you advocate for and that you have a passion for serving, because you deserve to heal. The same way that we are working with them to heal, we as clinicians, as doctors, and all those things, we also deserve to heal. And so I would love to connect with people. You can go to my website. Can I say that website?
Yes, relevantconnections.org. relevantconnections.org.
Yeah.
And it's just been a privilege, and I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Until we meet again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Charde is a motivational speaker, has won millions for her clients and grants, is a wonderful counselor, mother, wife, and friend, and can be reached at relevantconnections.org. 3 takeaways. Number 1, relevant connections. Make it real. Charde used rap stars to help communicate with her juvenile prisoners. Number 2, Jesus was a social worker. And remember, we are human. Give yourself grace. Number 3, cultural competence is a lifetime learning process, an attitude of curiosity and respect. I have enjoyed learning about Louisiana culture, the music, the celebrations, the tight-knit family culture, the spicy food. Well, I'm still a vegetarian. The accents. A bientôt. This is Dr. Christine Ince wishing you a balanced mind, body, and soul. Please subscribe, like, and share.